To the March edition of our monthly campus update webinar. First update, I suppose, a bit unscripted, but Microsoft seem to have updated their Teams interface overnight, which is always a nice surprise. For those of you who don't know, I'm Davies. I'm the sales manager here at Pugh. Usually I've got Evan with me, but he's at home, has been for the last few days, just recovering from surgery, recovering well. So we wish him all the best, obviously, and he'll be back with us next month, I'm sure. Instead, most of you will know Barry Lewis. He's our enterprise account manager, enterprise agreement account manager here at Pugh, and he's going to be available later on if there are any specific Microsoft questions that come up in the Q&A. We're also joined by John Hook from Sophos. John's going to be speaking about the Managed Detection and Response Service, MDR, so we look forward to that in a little while. As for the agenda today, I'm going to be looking first about the Microsoft price alignment, which is coming up from the 1st of April. Similarly, with Intune, there are a few further details now on top of what we said last month. And finally, there's been some announcements around Education Insights Premium and some updates to VLSC and license keys. So we'll go through all those. As I mentioned, hopefully we'll have time for Q&A at the end as well. As usual, the session's being recorded, so that recording will be made available to you at the end. So please feel free to share it with colleagues as you see fit. And it's also going to be posted on our YouTube channel, along with all the other sessions for you to refer back to as you need to. Just finally, before we start, looking forward to next month. The registrations are open. We're hoping to have a speaker from Microsoft to talk about ChatGPT, but we haven't had that 100% confirmed as yet, so we'll let you know as soon as we have. Okay, so let's look at the Microsoft price alignment, which is due from the 1st of April this year. As we discussed last time, background to this is that Microsoft are looking to take steps to align global pricing according to local exchange rates versus the US dollar rate. After the 1st of April, Microsoft are going to be doing this on a 6-monthly basis, so prices could come down as well as go up. We had been told there was a 9% price increase planned this April, but now we've had the price list for April, we can see that the 9% only applies to the cloud products, cloud-based products. So things like Microsoft 365 A3, A5 licenses, cloud-based Dynamics licenses, EMS, Intune, and quite a few of the Azure part numbers are going up as well. Monetary commitment part number is going up too. What isn't going up are the on-premise licenses, things like Windows Server, Exchange Server, SharePoint, that sort of thing. Also the desktop products, things like Visio and Project, which you install locally, they're not going up either. Like last time, although prices are going up from the 1st of April, they won't actually affect your enterprise agreements, EES or OVS, until the anniversary date. And if you're in a 3-year agreement, it won't affect you until that 3-year agreement comes to an end. Whichever scenario affects you, whichever scenario you're in, the best thing to do is speak to your account manager. They'll be able to tell you exactly what's going up, what's staying the same, how it's going to affect you price-wise, and when that's likely to happen. So have a chat with them. Also in the last session, Eva mentioned some new Intune functionality along with some licensing information. I know that quite a few of you have inquired about remote help specifically. So we've got some more information on that since last month. Basically, there are 2 licenses. The first more basic option is Intune Plan 2, Intune P2, which offers advanced endpoint management capabilities, including management and configuration of specialty devices, and Microsoft Tunnel for mobile application management. And then secondly, there's the Intune suite, which is everything I mentioned, which is in Intune P2, plus remote help, endpoint privilege management, and advanced endpoint analytics as well. There are some other advanced capabilities planned, and so far on the roadmap, that includes advanced app management, released in May, or that's the planned release date anyway, and cloud certification management, which is due later in the year. I think Mark's just posted a link to a good article on the Microsoft Learn website, which has all those things in a little more detail as well. Last month, I sat in on a Microsoft webinar, Reimagine webinar. A lot of really interesting things on that around learning accelerators, things like reading progress and coach, and maths progress and coach, and also something called Classwork, which is a curriculum management tool in Teams. Possibly these will be a little bit more of interest to K-12, to the K-12 market rather than FE and HE, but it's good to know what's available. And as part of that whole range of products, there's some analytics data available for things like that too. Things like reading fluency data, assignments data, meetings data. And that data is available to you in Education Insights Premium. And what's currently happening is that's going to be made available free to all institutions. And we were told in February that rollout is going to take around about a month to happen. So if you haven't got it popping up in your tenancy yet, it shouldn't be too far away. And then finally, just before we move on to John, just a quick one about VLSC. For a little while now, some features you'd usually have gone into VLSC for have been made available in the Microsoft Admin Center. Things like software downloads and keys, license summaries, relationship summaries, that sort of thing. From April 2023, Microsoft are going to start actually switching off that functionality in VLSC, and you'll instead be redirected to the Admin Center without the need to sign in again. But if you do want to just start going to Admin Center directly instead of going through VLSC first, if you go to Admin Center, go to your billing section, then your products, and there should be a volume licensing tab with all the information that you'd expect to see in VLSC under that. As I said, Mark's posted quite a few links to a bit more information on what I've spoken about already, so have a look at those. But that's it from me for the first part, and I'll hand over to John.
Fab, thank you very much indeed. Right, well, I've wrestled with the interface, and I think hopefully you should be able to see an opening slide. So yeah, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm going to draw on some information from the Sophos State of Ransomware report, which is a survey we conduct every year. We interview 5,600 network admins worldwide across a range of all different verticals, all different organizational sizes, and what we're really looking for is to find out just a bit more information about how cybersecurity looks in the real world, if you will. Some of the highlights from that survey are, first of all, the fact that 66% of organizations got hit by ransomware at least once during the 12 months running up to that survey being conducted. 46% elected to pay the ransom, having been hit by ransomware, which is a really bad idea for a whole bunch of reasons that we can potentially explore just a little later on. A very high proportion of attacks actually resulted in successful encryption of data. Most of the people in the survey were not Sophos customers. They were selected at random. So we didn't even ask them what cybersecurity they were using, but clearly what that tells us is in a lot of cases that maybe the cybersecurity they were using wasn't up to the task. And then last but not least, the average cost of ransomware is now an eye-watering £1.4 million. So it's a huge sum of money. Obviously, these are generic stats across the range of verticals. So I thought it would be useful, given that we have obviously a highly focused audience, that I would show you, who the key targets are. And I've conveniently highlighted the appropriate sectors here for you, so you can see that as it stands today, higher and lower education are both not particularly popular targets for cyber criminals, and that's really traditionally because those sectors don't always have a huge amount of money, and let's face it, cyber criminals have always traditionally been financially motivated, and in a lot of cases there's regulatory pressure not to pay the cyber criminals off. But the world of cybersecurity is changing quite rapidly, and again we'll talk about exactly how that's changing as we go on. In terms of what actually happens if you're getting hit by ransomware, the ransom demands that you see are very much tailored to who you are as an organization. So the cyber criminals work out, what your sweet spot is, what the pain point is that you'll cave in at and pay. And your ability to recover varies quite dramatically based on which sector you're in. Unfortunately, education is amongst the sectors that take the longest to recover, typically because they don't have the human resources to be able to deal with the recovery process. Although a worryingly high percentage, which again we'll look at, don't actually have a backup in place. So that's quite challenging as well. So with those high-level stats out of the way, I thought I'd give you a couple of examples of some of the things that we've investigated at Sophos and just some of the things that we're seeing worldwide, which are really changing cybersecurity. And a lot of these things are related to the Ukrainian conflict, particularly because this particular gang here, Conti, are amongst a number of cybercrime gangs that have actually really sort of stopped launching ransomware and malware for financial gain, but instead have started to hack for political purposes. And this is where the game starts to change, because all of a sudden we're starting to see disruptive attacks for political purposes, or maybe even advancing military purposes as well. So we saw an attack against a US satellite provider that was providing comms to Eastern Europe, as an example. We've also seen disruptive attacks against US airports. A little bit closer to home, we've seen attacks sort of just generally coming from that part of the world, but interestingly, attacks orientated towards organizations that maybe wouldn't typically have been prime targets. So the HSE in Ireland, the Irish healthcare, for example, an example here of an attack which is probably not financially motivated, and it's highly likely, for example, as well, that the Royal Mail attack is also linked to Russia, and probably more of a nuisance attack as well, rather than actually for financial purposes. We're also seeing not only a shift towards non-traditional targets because of these political purposes, but we've also seen a dramatic shift towards ransomware being launched to education. One, it is still disruptive. It is disruptive to the economy, because obviously parents, if kids can't go to school, parents can't go to work potentially, so there's a disruption there. But there are a bunch of gangs that have worked out that education is actually an interesting and potentially quite a soft target, because it's not a sector that's traditionally been targeted that heavily. Maybe defences aren't as good as they could be. And we've seen in particular a gang known as Vice Society. They hit the headlines not so long ago after targeting a group of schools in Gloucestershire. And they realised that for one, education is potentially a soft target, but there is still a rich set of information that they can steal. So you've got things like passport scans, you've got parent details, bank details, if they're taking payments for trips and school lunches and all that kind of thing. So actually, there's a lot of information inside an educational establishment that maybe traditionally cyber criminals would have overlooked. So we've seen a bit of a shift in tactics towards focusing on there. And there's a really interesting audit as well that was carried out in conjunction with London Grid for Learning, which really just looked at, particularly education and their readiness for attacks. And again, a very high percentage of those organizations experience some kind of cyber-related incident. A large proportion feel that they're maybe not ready for a cyber attack. And then this is the thing that really worries me, is that a very significant 4% of organizations had no backup plan. So if you get hit by ransomware and you have no backup, then that's a real problem, right? Because you are almost then stuck between accepting that you've lost the data or paying the cyber criminals off and hoping for the best. So yeah, again, some high level examples, but I thought I'd also give you a bit of an example about a case that we investigated as part of our incident response. So as well as offering proactive security, we do have an incident response desk. And this is an example of an education customer. I can't really name them because it's a little bit unfair, but these guys were not using Sophos and they got hit by an attack, and eventually they called us in. And the attack was a very long-lived attack. So they actually got penetrated in February using an initial access broker. Initial access brokers, really briefly, are a group of cyber criminals that basically just get access to an organization, sell their credentials, and then that's the end of the story. And this is exactly what happened. So they were hit by an IAB. There was a remote desktop server that was published available to the outside world with a very weak and flimsy password. It transpired that they were able to access. So Lockbit got in and they toyed around in the network for a little while. They used Mimikatz to harvest credentials. They used Raccoon to steal data out of the organization. And eventually, when they got bored of toying with the organization, they launched ransomware. And there's a ransomware note. Now, they panicked. They deleted the affected machines and restored them from backups and carried on as normal. And because they hadn't fixed the underlying problem, they were also then hit by another ransomware outbreak, a gang known as Hive. There's their ransom demand. And it transpires they used exactly the same attack vector to get in. And then a little bit later on, a couple of weeks later on, Alpha came on board, a third ransomware gang. They came in and encrypted the same files, again, using exactly the same mechanism. And it's at that point that the organization they realized that they probably needed some kind of additional assistance. So they called us in because this is the third, or at least they thought it was the third attack that they'd had a ransomware in a very short space of time. And when we started to reverse engineer the attack, we actually found out that these multiple different ransomware gangs had actually all taken their part in encrypting files. and we found a bunch of files that actually had been encrypted 5 times over. The interesting bit just here in the middle is that both Hive and Lockbit were fighting against each other. So one was encrypting the files, and then the other had come along and re-encrypted those encrypted files. So it just goes to show that actually in a relatively short amount of time, and again, bearing in mind it's an educational customer, things can go pretty bad pretty quickly. You might be wondering why things are this bad, and why aren't we better at cybersecurity? And it's really down to the way that the cyber criminals are using often our own tools against us. So traditionally, we would have talked at Sophos, and the cybersecurity industry at large would have talked about, have antivirus, have firewalls, but those types of protection don't always work when the cyber criminals are starting to use our own tools against us. So using things like RDP as a legitimate service, using things like PowerShell just in a malicious fashion is really hard for any kind of technology to be able to work out whether this is a legitimate use or not. So traditionally, I guess, or more recently, organizations have been encouraged to buy tools like XDR for human-led threat hunting. But this is really where it gets a little bit challenging, because buying those tools on its own, it's not necessarily enough to make you a threat hunter, in the same way that buying a set of boxing gloves and popping those on doesn't necessarily make you a fighter. It doesn't necessarily give you those skills by having XDR tools available to you, and it's also about having the time and the resources to be able to put into that. It is, however, a worthwhile exercise to be looking inside your own telemetry for warning signs. In a very high number of cases that we've investigated post-incident, we've seen something that tells us an attack is imminent. Very rarely does it go from nothing to ransomware straight away. We see all these steps along the way, and if we could have just intervened at some earlier point, then that attack might have been thwarted. However, in the defense of you as the audience, hunting for these kind of telltale signs is really challenging, right? So like looking for a needle in a haystack, how many log lines have you got to look at? How much information is there to plow through? Do you have the time to do this? Can you do this at midnight, 24 hours a day? It's just an impossible challenge. And that's really where we're at with cybersecurity. So we feel that cybersecurity has become too much of a challenge for most organizations to deal with effectively, particularly in education, because you just really struggle with the human resources associated with it. So we advocate the idea of taking on board our managed detection and response service. And what we do with our MDR service is we basically look at the telemetry coming from your estate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We look for the telltale signs of an attack being imminent, and then we can either let you know or we can respond on your behalf to shut down those incidents before they become more serious. So we take a bunch of telemetry, obviously from our own products. You may well know Sophos as a brand that does provide endpoint protection, firewalls, that kind of thing. But we do also offer, as part of our service, a whole bunch of third-party integrations. So if you're running Windows Defender, for example, we will integrate with the Graph Security platform. If you're using a third-party firewall like Palo Alto, Checkpoint, Fortinet, to name but a few, then again, we can take the telemetry from those platforms as well, and a bunch of other things as well. And we ingest all of that telemetry into our data center, and then we use artificial intelligence to distill down to the events that are really interesting. So we go from somewhere like 31 billion events on a daily basis down to about 2,500 escalations that actually need human intervention. And this is really where the power of managed detection and response comes into its own, because we're getting those important events in front of an analyst in just 1 minute. And then we spend an average about 25 minutes of time investigating, is this a real incident? How serious is it? What's the scope of the problem? And then a further 12 minutes to remediate. So launching scripts, kicking off the bad guys, isolating infected machines, that kind of thing. So you've got a mean time to resolution of 38 minutes in a security incident, which is absolutely fantastic, because nothing good is going to happen. The longer a cyber criminal is present in the network, then the more data is stolen, the more backdoors may have been left, the more encryption may have happened. So shutting down these incidents really, really quickly is super important. So I appreciate I've gone through a lot in a relatively short amount of time. So just by way of wrap up, our service is there to augment the capabilities that you have within your estate. So if you've got a security team, then first and foremost, good on you for having that security capability in-house. But the question is, how much time are they spending simply dismissing alerts, playing this game of what I like to call alert whack-a-mole, and just getting distracted from those. We can make your security team much sharper, because we can give them the incidents and the specific guidance to resolve those issues really, really quickly, if that's what you want us to do. If you don't have any skills in-house, then that's okay. It's completely a team sport. If you maybe don't have skills available at evenings, weekends, bank holidays, we can, as I've already mentioned, react on your behalf. If you have no skills at all, then we can take the burden on and resolve those issues, and simply tell you what we've done, give you the guidance on what to do moving forward to protect you further. And then, of course, not just working with the security teams you've got, but also working with the technology you've got there as well. You don't have to go out and buy a whole bunch of Sophos products, right? If you're happy with Microsoft, if you're happy with whatever you've got on your endpoints, whatever you've got on your firewalls, we will quite happily integrate with that. We're just offering the service wrapper around it. And we think it's a really valuable proposition, because cybersecurity, as I've already mentioned, is a challenge which is too great for a lot of organizations. And if we can take over the burden of threat hunting and remediation of issues when we see them, it allows you to just do so much more with your time. You can do all of those things that you never get around to doing, like patching, software management, audits, checking your firewall policies are up to date, all those kind of really important tasks that just get left to the back burner because you're constantly being distracted by alerts from your existing security products. So it's a really exciting way that we can help you more with your security, and, like I said, free you up to be the best IT department that you can be. So it's an absolute win-win, and ultimately leads to much better security outcomes. So that's the really quick overview. I appreciate the chat function is open, so if you've got any questions that you might want to ask straight away, then feel free. Obviously, you can always contact your account manager at Pugh afterwards as well to ask any questions one-to-one, but I'm happy to take a couple of questions with the couple of minutes that I've got left, if there's anything on your mind.
Great. Thanks for that, John. Really appreciate that. While the questions are coming, if there are any from anybody, how broad is the sort of third party, how many third party vendors do you deal with to bring data in from?
That's a great question. So there's about 25 at the moment, which doesn't sound like a lot, but they are all of the leading cybersecurity providers. So I already mentioned Microsoft is up there, and Microsoft, we have actually a whole bunch of integrations with Microsoft. So Windows Defender on the endpoint, Azure from a public cloud perspective, their identity management, to name but a few. Most of the key firewalls in this sector as well are also included in there. We offer integrations with a whole bunch of email providers, a whole bunch of other cloud platforms and providers as well. There's a really broad selection. In fact, if I just go back here a little bit, that will give you a bit of an idea. So the endpoint side of things is just down there. So you've got people like Microsoft, SentinelOne, Trend, Checkpoint, Endpoint, CrowdStrike, BlackBerry Cylance, McAfee, Malwarebytes, as well as Microsoft, which is included up here. Then on the firewall side of things, you've got all these vendors here. Your identity providers, yeah, you can see there's a quite an extensive list, and this is a list that we're aiming to grow roughly 4 per quarter, and that will be driven by customer demand. So the more integrations that people want. For example, we know a lot of people wanted to have WatchGuard as a firewall integration, so that's being worked on right now as one of those additional add-ons. So if you've got an environment that maybe has something in there that's not included in here, as long as it's a security product and it generates the right kind of alerts and telemetry, then we can create an integration relatively easily to pull those things in. So we are entirely open to suggestion on what integrations would be useful next, but I like to think we cover all the important ones. And of course, don't forget, we do also integrate naturally with our own products, so our own firewall, our own endpoint protection, our own email, and our own cloud platforms as well. So a good set, I would say.
Great. Okay, good.
No worries.
Just keeping an eye on the chat. So there's nothing come through in the chat in terms of questions. There is still time to ask them if anyone has got one, or if they prefer to come off mute and ask directly, that's fine as well. I have just posted the link to register for next month's. We haven't finalized the details yet, but the registration, you can register there, and we'll send more details then when that's ready. Yeah, unless anyone's got questions.
I'll preempt one. Some people ask, well, how is this priced and licensed? And it's actually priced and licensed in a really simple way. So we look at how many users you've got, or uniquely in the case of education, if you've got a disparate number of users to devices, we'll take whichever's the lowest. So if you've got a high number of students, low number of devices, then we'll just go with the best option for you. And then we'll look at the number of servers you've got. So it's super simple. It's a really, really easy pricing model. There are naturally sector discounts available. So that's hopefully a bit of an incentive as well. And there's some really good education focused case studies that we have as well that you can get from the Sophos website. I did just see a question there about Smoothwall. It's funny you should ask that, because I was talking to our product manager about Smoothwall just the other day, actually. So that's being looked at the moment. The only problem we've got with Smoothwall is they're quite sort of bespoke to the UK market. So there's a bit of a challenge there, but if we can find a business case for it, that's definitely something we would consider. Did I see another one in there as well? Do you protect cloud services? Yeah, so Google is not one which is currently supported just because of the way that they do their APIs, but Office 365 is a really big integration that we're very excited about, looking at suspicious activity and how people are using Office 365. There's some great integrations there with AWS as well. Oh, in fact, sorry, Google Cloud is. I'm not quite sure what the integration is with Google Cloud. That might be one that we could take offline and have a look at. Actually, I didn't even notice that was on there, Google Cloud. So that's an interesting one. So yeah, that may well be possible. Workspace is it may be slightly different area to the way that GCP operates a public cloud environment, but I could certainly take a look at that for you, Stuart. That's not a problem at all. The question is, MDR still applicable as well with Smoothwall? So yeah, even if we can't integrate with your in your firewall right now, as long as we've got something on the endpoint that we can integrate with, then that's where the bulk of the telemetry comes from. Firewalls have a really great position of being able to scan network traffic, but again, there are ways and means around that. So we also offer, as you can see here, top left, an MDR product, and network detection and response. So even if we can't hook in directly to your firewall, maybe we can put an NDR sensor in place as well, and then get the network traffic that way. So there are always ways and means of getting that telemetry, even if we can't integrate directly with the firewall right now. Okay. Not sure if there's any more, but I'll give it just a moment or two if there's any further questions.
Did I just see another one pop up there?
Yeah, just a comment about Google Cloud and separate to Google Workspace. Yeah, I appreciate there's a division between the two. I'm not sure exactly what the integration capability is there and what they would offer us as in terms of telemetry, but I'm happy to take that offline and go find that out for you.
Okay, so yeah, if that's it, I think we are coming up to the 30 minutes, so we'll leave it there. I'm sure if MDR is something that interests you, I'm sure we can have a specific chat, set up a call between us and Sophos and yourselves, and see how it would be a good fit for you. So I'm sure that's something we can do moving forward. So yeah, that's it for this month's webinar. And as Mark mentioned, the registration for next month is open already, so get yourselves on there and have a good rest of the day, and we'll see you next month. Thanks very much.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John.